The Conservative leadership contest is over. And the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom will be Liz Truss. It's Monday, it's 1 o'clock, and we're live in Westminster. It's been a long contest, and this is how it ended just half an hour ago.
I give notice that Liz Truss is elected as the leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party. Liz, come up on stage.
Thank you for putting your faith in me to lead our great Conservative Party.
Liz Truss will become Prime Minister tomorrow. What's her answer to some major questions facing the UK?
I will act immediately on bills and on energy supply.
He'll have to leave number 10 first. Have we heard the last of him?
He will be a great loss to politics, but hopefully it'll only be a temporary loss.
And will Prime Minister Truss be able to unite her party after all of this?
£40 billion more borrowing. That is the country's credit card. It's our children and grandchildren.
It's been a busy summer and a busy first day back. I'm joined by the economist Gerard Lyons, the Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting, Financial Times Whitehall editor Sebastian Payne and Spectator assistant editor Isabel Hardman. And we'll bring you all the developments as they happen. First of all, though, let's show you how the results looked. You can see here just over 57% to Liz Truss, just over 40, or no, just actually under 43% to Rishi Sunak. Let's have a listen to Liz Truss speaking after that was announced.
I will deliver a bold plan to cut taxes and grow our economy. I will deliver on the energy crisis, dealing with people's energy bills, but also dealing with the long-term issues we have on energy supply. And I will deliver on the National Health Service. But we all will deliver for our country. And I will make sure that we use all the fantastic talents of the Conservative Party, our brilliant members of Parliament and peers, our fantastic councillors, our MSs, our MSPs, all of our councillors and activists and members right across our country. Because, my friends, I know that we will deliver, we will deliver, and we will deliver. And we will deliver a great victory for the Conservative Party in 2024. Thank you. Thank you.
His victory speech there, just at the QE Centre, round the corner here in Westminster. The result was expected. All the polls had pointed to it. Let's get a first reaction from our guests here in the studio. Gerard Lyons, you're an economist. You worked for Boris Johnson when he was Mayor of London, but you broadly support Liz Truss's plans, particularly for the economy, and that is going to be at the very top of her in-tray in terms of cost of living. But your response to the win?
Well, I think it was a positive outcome. As you say, it's good that she's now there. She's highlighted the three issues that she's reiterated throughout the campaign: the economy, the energy crisis and the health system. So I think it's good to finally have her there. The problem has been that this campaign has gone on far too long. It's created too much uncertainty. So I think we should all treat it as a positive, and later this week I would expect her to start unveiling some significant policies.
Are you treating it as a positive that we have a result, Wes?
Well, firstly, I think it's unforgivable that despite the fact there has been a Prime Minister and a Cabinet all summer, we've seen complete paralysis in inaction, whether on the cost of living crisis and people's rising energy bills, the crisis in the NHS, which I think we've seen on our television screens, has been worse than the depths of winter crises in the height of summer. So that bodes really ill. And to top it off, whether it was her interview yesterday with Laura Kuenssberg or that frankly very strange speech she gave just then, there's no sense of any answers coming from her. So how is she going to grip the cost of living crisis? What's her answer to that? You can't just say, I will deliver for the NHS. Deliver what? When? How? How urgently? I think that the Conservative Party has taken the country for granted all summer, behaving as if they're not currently in power and if they've been powerless to do anything to affect people's lives. And worse still, pretending that somehow the mess that Liz Truss inherits has been someone else's fault, as if someone else has been in government for the last 12 years.
We're going to hear from a Liz Truss supporter and Conservative MP who may be able to answer some of the questions you've just posed, but no doubt we will hear some of the detail over the next few days. It has really been a long, hot political summer. Seb, do you think that Liz Truss has a stronger mandate as she would like to deal with these critically important issues?
Well, 57% is 14 points ahead of her rival Rishi Sunak, so it's fairly emphatic, but not quite as much as I think Liz Truss's campaign would have liked or have privately hoped for. Now, if we go back to 2019, Boris Johnson won with 2/3 of the vote, 66% against Jeremy Hunt, and that gave him the authority to reshape the cabinet and take a different policy agenda. Liz Truss, it's still fairly clear, but it's not quite as strong as maybe she would like to have hoped, and this creates the whole problem about her leadership, that, you know, she doesn't have the majority of Conservative MPs behind her. She does have a majority of Tory party members. But if she's going to pursue this new radical economic strategy we've been hearing about over the summer, is there going to be the mandate to do that? And I think Tory party management, particularly among MPs, is going to be a major feature of the Truss premiership, because of the fact there's going to be a lot of MPs who supported Rishi Sunak, who supported Penny Mordaunt. Don't forget, Liz Truss came third in that final ballot, just up until the final ballot of MPs there. So keeping everybody happy when you've only got 57%, it's going to be a bit tricky.
Isabel, I'm going to get a reaction from you. Just as we see the pictures outside number 10 Downing Street, you can see journalists gathered out there. They've been out there, of course, all morning, even though the action in terms of the result was about 5 minutes around the corner. Oh, there's Larry, the Downing Street cat, showing absolutely zero interest in what's going on. Can you take us through the sort of choreography over the next sort of 24, 36 hours? Because, of course, Liz Truss is not going to formally be asked to put together a government until tomorrow, when both she and Boris Johnson go to Balmoral to see the Queen.
Yes, so they're travelling on separate planes for security reasons. Boris Johnson will see the Queen and give his formal resignation. And then Liz Truss will go in to see the Queen, and there will be the formal invitation to form a government from the Queen. And then she will fly back to London, where her reshuffle, which she has already largely planned out with some notable issues, will then start to take place. And I mentioned notable issues because there are a number of people who backed her thinking they'd got one job. I mean, I think at one stage there were probably about 10 people who thought they were going to be Chancellor, but that has narrowed down now to just Kwasi Kwarteng. But there are other people who would like bigger jobs than they're likely to be offered. So Ian Duncan-Smith, for instance, is known to not be particularly happy that he's not going to be getting a delivery department and is instead possibly headed for Leader of the House, which is a sort of often regarded as a semi-retirement position in politics.
We're going to talk about some of those appointments that will be made and announced, no doubt, some point tomorrow into Wednesday. But I said we would talk to one of Liz Truss's supporters throughout the campaign, Michelle Donnellan. She was Education Secretary for a couple of days before she resigned in order to ease Boris Johnson out of Downing Street. Thank you very much for joining us. Michelle, will you be heading back, do you think, to the Department for Education? Have you had a phone call yet?
As you know, the process is tomorrow, so I don't think speculation is that helpful. There is the correct process. Liz is in charge of who's going to be in the cabinet, so we'll see what tomorrow brings.
So your reaction to the result?
Well, it's a fantastic result. She's won by over 20,000 votes, and it gives her a clear mandate now to move forward, unite the Conservative Party, and as she said today, deliver for the country. And we do face horrendous challenges with the cost of living, with the energy crisis. It's a difficult time to be Prime Minister, but I have no doubts that Liz Truss is completely up to the job.
Right. You say it's a clear mandate. A clear mandate to do what exactly, Michelle Donelan? What are you expecting? Is there going to be a freeze in the energy price cap?
So what I'm expecting is that we deliver on the manifesto that we were elected to do, and we also make good on Liz's plan that she's communicated over the last 6 weeks, a plan for growth, where we alter course, we cut taxation, we enable people to keep more of their own money from the off instead of giving them handouts where it's recycled money back, and we grow our economy to ensure that people move forward and can weather the storm that is coming.
Right, so you're expecting no handouts, to use that word that has been bandied about during this campaign?
No, so Liz never ruled out handouts. What she said was that the first step should always be reducing taxation, enabling people to keep more of their own money from the off. That should be what you do first. Then, of course, you can layer it up with additional support. And she's going to do a large fiscal event akin to a budget in the coming weeks, where she'll be outlining all of that in thorough detail along with her Chancellor.
But hang on, Michelle Donelan, you say that she's going to cut taxes. She's going to do that first. Is that what you're expecting before any announcement on how she is going to tackle the soaring bills, energy bills that people are facing, never mind rising inflation? Can we really afford to wait until later in the month to hear what she's going to do for those people?
Well, no, she'll be doing the lot in a large fiscal event akin to a budget. You know, I don't think it would be responsible for her to have outlined to the minutiae of detail exactly what she'd be doing without having access to the country's books. She wouldn't do that if you're about to take over a company. It's a sensible way to do it. She's outlined the top things that she'll be doing and then said, look, you know, I will be providing the detail in a large fiscal event, working with my Chancellor. My priority, she said very clearly, week after week, is helping people through the cost of living crisis, tackling the energy crisis, not just in the short term, but also the long term, growing our economy for the future and delivering on that manifesto.
Right, but I mean, the state of finances and the state of the economy and the price cap that has been announced, with people perhaps having to face annual energy bills of £3,500. The fiscal event that you've talked about isn't due, we think, until the 21st of September. Are you not expecting her, as the new Prime Minister, to set out in the coming days how she is going to help households and businesses? Is it going to amount to something similar to the furlough scheme, something in the region of 70 to 100 billion pounds of state intervention?
So, look, I'm not going to announce the policies of the newly elected leader that becomes Prime Minister
is that what you
tomorrow,
would like to see?
Before she's even appointed Chancellor of the Exchequer. You know, there's a correct way of doing this. I'm sure that we'll see a statement this week on the cost of living and the energy crisis. She's said that she's going to prioritise that. And, you know, I believe that she's a person that doesn't just talk a good game, she delivers. She's shown that in the 6 departments that she's worked in. That's why the Conservative Party members have backed her throughout this process. That's why the majority of MPs back her. And she's going to reunite the party, move forward and deliver for the country and help constituents, including my own, in Wiltshire.
Right. Well, a lot of people will say, actually, the party is split in terms of the number of MPs who supported her, certainly from the beginning and the outset. How serious do you think the situation is, Michelle Donelan, when it comes to the energy crisis? Are people being too alarmist about it?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, it is extremely serious.
Right.
Nobody is underestimating it that I've heard. I've been out canvassing this summer in my constituency, and time after time again, you know, people are genuinely worried about this. People of all different types of financial income, and that's why it's important that we're helping everybody. That's why it's important that people are keeping more of their own money, and that's why it's important that we are then for reducing taxation. But of course, there will need to be more support on top of that. And we will see that in the coming weeks as the priority.
Do you see it on a scale as the pandemic in terms of furlough?
So I don't think it's helpful to start comparing one crisis to another.
No.
I don't think there's anybody that's out there saying that this is this should be underestimated, or that this isn't worrying people or affecting their daily lives, or going to impact them as we progress into winter. You know, this has to be taken extremely seriously. It will affect everybody, as I just said a moment ago, of all incomes. That's why we will be helping them.
I mean, if it's going to be taken really seriously, why did Liz Truss say yesterday, when she was asked about it on the BBC, that we shouldn't be predicting an Armageddon scenario?
Well, we certainly shouldn't. Armageddon means the end of the world, so we shouldn't be predicting an Armageddon scenario. I think that's quite a sensible comment to make.
But what I'm trying to get from you, Michelle, is where are you? Where is Liz Truss, Prime Minister Liz Truss, going to be in terms of tackling what many people think could become, if not the end of the world, but could become a real emergency?
Well, I think you just have to look back at what she's been saying for the last 6 weeks. She's been consistent. She has called it an energy crisis. She has said that this is worrying people up and down the nation, that this needs to be the #1 priority, along with growing the economy. She said that if we don't, we're going to sleepwalk into a recession where people will actively be losing their jobs. That'll be even worse. Under Liz Truss's plan, she wants to avoid that, ensure that we are growing our economy, cutting taxation, facing these challenges, and not just in the short term, but in the long term, so we never put ourselves in this position again in terms of our vulnerability with energy.
I mean, Liz Truss, of course, has been a member of the Cabinet, probably the longest-serving member of all the Cabinet since the Conservatives came into power in 2010, in one way or another. And it's been a very brutal campaign between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. How do you think she's going to be able to put the party back together again when Rishi Sunak called the sorts of cuts in taxes that you have just outlined and support as immoral? He said her economic agenda was a fairy tale.
Well, look, you know, during a campaign, people will always criticise the opponent's policies.
Liz ran
a very positive campaign. Liz ran a very positive campaign. As I said before, she now has the majority of MPs backing her from all regions of the country. And there is a great desire to now reunite. Divided parties don't win elections. Divided parties don't deliver on manifestos. Divided parties don't do well in crisis. And we know that. And we are all determined to get back together, focus on the needs of the British public and move forward.
Well, that is true. Divided parties don't tend to win elections. What will Liz Truss, what should she do to reach out to those MPs, including Rishi Sunak, so that she can put the party, as you put it, back together again?
Well, she already said in her acceptance speech that she would be utilising the talents across the entire party. We've seen people defect to her during this campaign, in fact. And I'm confident that they will rally behind her in the coming days and we will move forward as a party together.
Michelle Donlan, thank you very much for joining us, Liz Truss supporter. Is that what's going to happen, Isabel, that everyone is going to come together harmoniously under a Liz Truss premiership after the campaign that we have witnessed over the last 8 weeks?
I mean, the Tory party is not like that in the best of times anyway, in fairness. It's more like a sort of bunch of 14-year-olds at a disco who are sort of desperate for, you know, whoever the PM of the day is to look at them. And I think party management is always going to be hard for a Prime Minister, but it is particularly hard for Liz Truss, given lower support amongst MPs, given the sort of low margin by which she beat Rishi Sunak. And so the pressure is on her to appoint people who are going to be good at delivering, as she kept saying slightly woodenly in that acceptance speech, because they've only got, 18 months in which to prove that they can do something material to make voters think, oh, actually, we can back these guys again. And they've only really got a week and a bit to show that Liz Truss has got an ability to take command of the situation. I think if by the end of this week, probably middle of next week, there is a sense of sort of confusion over the energy bills policy, that's when things are going to get really tough.
Right, do you agree with that? I mean, we're going to talk about the policy itself. I'm going to get you to explain that for us, Seb. But, Gerard, do you actually agree with Isabel on this notion that her premiership is going to sort of be made or broken on what she says on the energy crisis and cost of living?
Well, it might not be made or broken, but there's no doubt she has to actually do something quite significant in the next few weeks. In fact, of the three things she needs to do, two of those likely are necessary over the next week. One is you've touched on the energy front. The good news is that they will be doing something. Question is how they actually do it. The second thing this week is the whole issue linked to inflation. And the third issue, which we'll have to wait till either the 14th or 21st, this so-called fiscal statement, is the whole fiscal policy, where, quite frankly, Rishi Sunak's comments in the campaign I thought were quite outrageous, actually.
Do you?
Particularly as he was previously a Chancellor only 2 months ago. On the fiscal front, we actually have a lot more room for manoeuvre. And it's quite important that if we were to continue with the tax hikes that have been implemented or planned in the last 2 years, and we're the only G7 country to raise taxes into a global downturn, if those tax increases were allowed to go ahead, then we would have a deep recession. So what she needs to do on the fiscal front is to not only create the space to address the energy crisis, she needs to actually start to be doing things on the fiscal front, which I think she will do, to hopefully prevent a recession, but ideally, at the worst case, make sure it's short-lived and as shallow as possible.
Right. Well, do you agree with that, Wes? Because, of course, the Labour Party has been at pains to say that the tax burden has been way too high. You called for those national insurance increases. Well, you called for them not to go ahead. So presumably you agree with what Gerard's just said.
Well, the reason we have a high tax economy is because we have a low growth economy, and that's a direct result of the economic policies we've seen for the last 12 years, and the Conservatives have to accept responsibility for that. I think the big problem for Liz Truss is she's created so many hostages to fortune this summer because she's been talking entirely, exclusively to the Conservative Party membership and not to the country. She's promised spending increases and tax cuts. And let's be clear about this. If a Labour politician had been saying the things that she's been saying all summer, we had been hauled over the hot coals, and every Conservative in the land would be saying Labour can't be trusted with the economy. But here's the kind of crux of it. Everything that we have been saying has been costed, and we've explained how we would pay for it, because that's how politics works. There are only two questions you have to ask on any policy: who benefits and who pays? And on the cost of living crisis, who benefits? Everyone in the country, with particular help for the most disadvantaged, but everyone would benefit. Who would pay? The oil and gas companies. So Liz Truss doesn't have to spend lots of time asking civil servants what to do. There is a fully costed, well-argued, well supported by the public policy, and she's welcome to take it because people would benefit across the country.
On that first point by Wes Streeting, Gerard Lyons, it's true. Liz Truss has been talking to a tiny number of people out in the country, the Conservative Party members, and that's who she has pitched to. Is she going to change now?
But, OK, let's put it in perspective. She was the only cabinet minister, or the first cabinet minister, actually to stand up and oppose the national insurance tax increase. And I think what she actually said at that time is relevant for now. She was making the point that you have a lot more room for fiscal manoeuvre. And as she said during the last few weeks, fiscal action is now necessary, it's affordable, and it's not inflationary. So I'm not here to defend the politics, but in terms of the economics, what I think is quite interesting, and it comes back to Wes's point, which he's quite right on, that we have high taxes, not just because we're a low-growth economy, but the choices that have been made in Whitehall.
All right.
For the last actually, since the 2008 financial crisis, the view has been trend growth is low, more of the budget deficit is structural. That's why the Treasury 10 years ago said austerity was necessary. That's why they've said now tax increases are necessary. You need to turn that on the head. It's like being in a hole and digging deeper. And she's going to go for growth, which is the real positive.
But after 12 years, this is like asking the arsonist to put out the fire, isn't it? You know, they've stored up all these problems, and now they want to say, oh, don't worry, the fire brigade's here.
We're going to come back. We're going to come back to the issue of taxation, and also your point about whether, as you say, and Kwasi Kwarteng, whom we widely expect to be the next Chancellor, he's written today in the Financial Times to say that actually he would also say that we can afford more borrowing. But before we do, let's have a look at these headlines. In the Times, first of all, Truss team hold talks on freezing energy bills. In The Telegraph, similar headline, Truss could freeze bills to avoid energy Armageddon. Is that what is going to happen, despite the fact, well, she wouldn't rule it out yesterday, but she hasn't said she would do this?
Well, up until now, Liz Truss has ruled nothing out and ruled nothing in, so we could just be sticking our fingers in the air at this moment. But the indications do suggest this is where we're heading, and there was a meeting a couple of weeks ago between some of the big energy companies and Kwasi Kwarteng and Jacob Rees-Mogg, which again is an indication of the roles they're going to take up in the Truss government. We're expecting Kwasi Kwarteng to be Chancellor and Jacob Rees-Mogg to be Business Secretary. And this proposal essentially is the government would provide state-backed loans to allow them to freeze energy bills that would then be paid back in the long term, the future based on, obviously, the excess profit. Again, it's not entirely dissimilar to what an idea Labour put forward a couple of weeks ago. And, of course, obviously, Labour proposed a windfall tax and Rishi Sunak did the windfall tax, and Labour proposed the freeze, and that's what Liz Truss looks like she's going to do. And she's obviously going to try and combine that with the sort of things Gerard's been talking about in terms of taxes. But the issue with all this is does it add up? And I think that's why Kwasi Kwarteng's article in the FT this morning is very important, because he's trying to say to financial markets, don't worry too much. He said there is going to be what they call fiscal loosening, which means borrowing more money to pay for all this, but they are going to be fiscally neutral. And I think the thing I will be watching out for is there going to be a spending review at some point? Because if Liz Truss is going to propose this big freezing of bills plus tax reductions, there's going to have some government spending. And then where does that money come from? What are you going to cut? And is that, again, going to make life even more difficult for the public sector? So at the moment, it's sort of like we're going to do everything, but you can't do everything. And those hard choices are exactly what she's going to face tomorrow evening.
Well, reality is going to hit fairly soon in all sorts of ways. But, Isabel, until it does, what sort of scale are we talking about? Because people have mooted these figures, something between 60 and 100 billion pounds. That's big if it's going up to 100 billion pounds. Of course, I think the total cost of COVID was more in the region of 350 billion, but furlough was probably around that 60, 70 billion. Is that what you understand the figures to be?
Yeah, look, I think the window that we always talk about in politics has moved, and this was something that Rishi Sunak was quite upset by, because he wanted to move it back to people not thinking that the government has to or should step in every time there is a crisis. And so actually, you know, when Keir Starmer made his proposal on freezing energy bills over the summer, I just remember the reaction back in 2013 to Ed Miliband's energy price cap, and how he was written up as dangerous, and, you know, all these sort of quite threatening connotations. Everything has changed because of the pandemic, and actually those big policies are now considered what government should be doing for right or wrong.
Right.
I think in terms of sort of reality hitting, I mean, I was talking to a Conservative MP recently who said the proverbial is about to hit the fan, but we can't afford to turn the fan on. And I think that's the sort of, that's the kind of awful dynamic that we're going to have this winter, where it's just going to be very, very difficult to confront reality and then to work out what feasibly can be done to deal with it, because these sums are stratospheric in terms of energy bills. And then you get onto the NHS and the pressures that health service is facing.
I mean, no one would envy her, really, in that position, would they, Seb?
No, and I just want to follow up on something Isabel said, which is that we're talking £100 billion. That's just for this winter. And, you know, this problem is not going away, that we're not suddenly going to get to next year and Vladimir Putin's going to turn the gas back on and prices will come back down. Every indication is this is a medium-term problem. And it's very notable when Liz Truss talks about the energy crisis, she's talking about getting through this winter, and then also longer-term energy security. But, you know, Boris Johnson was talking about building nuclear power plants, which is going to take 10, 15 years. So I think she's got to look at something much more immediate, because otherwise, we cannot as a country afford to be spending £100 billion every quarter, every 6 months to keep energy bills low. There needs to be some serious reform there. And again, very hard choices to be made.
All right, well, let's park that just for the moment. Because Rishi Sunak, who has just lost the contest, has tweeted, "Thank you to everyone who voted for me in this campaign. I've said throughout that the Conservatives are one family, even if it didn't look like it over the summer. It's right we now unite behind the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, as she steers the country through difficult times." We're going to be talking to one of Rishi Sunak's supporters a little later on in the programme. But your response to that, Seb?
I think, look, Rishi Sunak clearly wants just everything to calm down right now, and also, I think, trying to rally his supporters, because he had the largest public number of MPs before this contest began, and I think he's aware that they're going to have to try and get behind Liz Truss if the whole thing's not going to get very difficult. But, it's what you'd expect from a losing candidate.
Will it work?
Well, also, he can say one thing, but the people around him can do something else. Very and that's true. Largely what happened in the campaign, was that he came across as very nice and personable. And this is the case for Liz Truss's campaign as well, and then sent the sort of acolytes out onto the media to go against somebody else.
Right, and are you in forgiveness mode? Gerard, you said it was outrageous what Rishi Sunak said about her economic plans.
Well, it's good that what he said there. But actually, I think we're being far too pessimistic here. Quite frankly, we have to be realistic about the near-term long-term challenges. The world economy is slowing down. Inflationary pressures are expected to ease. This is a problem impacting all of Western Europe, not just the UK. But on the positive side...
On the inflation side, we are one of the highest in Europe.
Well, Western Europe probably could be all in the same boat, actually. But technically, we will be higher. But I don't think we can sort of get too worked up about that. The problem is the
you
same
may be
for
able
us.
to say that.
It's a real problem for us. It's a real problem for Germany. Producer prices are rising even more in Germany than here. But the reality is that the jobs market is really good. That's really a positive. And on the fiscal side, what we are now seeing, as far as I can make out, as a Prime Minister from tomorrow, who actually is now going to be confronting the issues and trying to get some balance between monetary and fiscal policy. I know we haven't talked about monetary policy here, but for the last 15 years, we've had this real distortion where monetary policy has been the shock absorber. It's led to asset price inflation, markets not pricing for risk, and it's allowed the pickup in inflation to take place. So no one's underestimating the challenge, but we do need a sense of realism. But at the same time, it's not as bad as you're suggesting. And if we actually start to address the problems
Well, obviously, if we start to address the problems, we'll have to wait and see. But in the meantime, lots of people don't really know that much about Liz Truss yet. If you're one of them, here's Vicky Young.
She's a grafter. She means what she says, she knows what she wants, and she gets it.
These are some of Liz Truss's most supportive friends. Activists in her Norfolk constituency have nothing but praise for their MP, the next Prime Minister.
The job is so important to her, getting done what she wants to get done.
There's no airs and graces about Liz. She's just, as you see, she's got the skin of a rhinoceros when it comes to putting up with people having a go at her, I can assure you.
Several times over the years, colleagues have predicted that Liz Truss's career was on a downward path, that she'd soon be spending more time here in Norfolk than in Westminster. But friends say she's always been underestimated, and her survival is evidence of a clever politician with a steely determination. Her political journey has taken her from a family she describes as left-wing, where she joined her parents in the campaign for unilateral nuclear disarmament, to Oxford University, where she was a Liberal Democrat and took to the conference stage to argue in favour of abolishing the monarchy.
We Liberal Democrats believe in opportunity for all. We believe in fairness and common sense.
After graduating, she joined the Conservatives, worked as an accountant and was selected to fight the safe Tory seat of South West Norfolk. But her political career was almost derailed when news emerged of an affair with an MP. She fought off attempts to oust her and was elected to Parliament in 2010. She was quickly promoted first to Education Minister. Those who worked with her back then say she was always across the detail.
One of the things that successful teams need is someone who really believes in an idea, and Liz really believes in a lot of very big ideas. When I worked for her, we called her the Minister for Maths, and this was a real focal point. She can create a team through her beliefs, through her passion, through her evangelism for important ideas.
Her first cabinet job was Environment Secretary. It was obvious, though, that some work would be needed on her presentational skills.
We import 2/3 of our cheese. That is a disgrace.
Liz.
When the Brexit referendum was called, she campaigned to stay in the EU, something she later said was wrong. Nicola Horlick, a Liberal Democrat, was part of that Remain team.
For somebody to say, you know, I had this conviction about one thing and the next day, actually, I was wrong about that and I've now got a different conviction. When it seems that that's just about getting power, that really concerns me.
You don't agree with Liz Truss on lots of things. Do you think she's got any qualities that would make her a decent Prime Minister?
You've got this person who's very disciplined, very well organised, but is lacking on the communication and charisma side.
But friends say she does know how to get her message across, and her Instagram posts show her playful side. Ruder colleagues think her love of a photo opportunity betrays a superficiality. She was certainly mocked for this regal pose last Christmas. Her promotion to Foreign Secretary has given her a global platform. Some think there are less than subtle echoes of Margaret Thatcher, a comparison she loves. Liz Truss will be Britain's third female Prime Minister. Life for her, her husband and 2 daughters is about to change, and no one's underestimating the challenges that lie ahead. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
So, Vicky Young there with an outline of Liz Truss. Labour's response. What should be the strategy, Wes Streeting, from Keir Starmer in terms of dealing with Liz Truss?
Well, I think we have to continue to demonstrate that when it comes to sharing the priorities of the British people, having answers to their concerns and being a serious, credible alternative to the Conservatives, that when voters go to the ballot box, they see another 4 or 5 years as a Conservative government as a bigger risk than choosing change with Labour. And I think across a whole range of issues, we've demonstrated that we're more serious, we're more thoughtful, and that we're not going to make promises we can't keep, which I think is probably going to be, in addition to the in-tray that she's got, the biggest challenge for Liz Truss is going to be all of these hostages to fortune she's created over the summer by making all sorts of promises to Conservative members without thinking at all about what's right for the country.
So there's not going to be a change, if you like, in approach to the way Keir Starmer dealt with Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. As you say, a serious contender, a thoughtful contender in the way that you have presented it. But Liz Truss is not Boris Johnson. She will be different.
She will try and present herself as change, and when you look at kind of the reinvention that Liz Truss has undergone, from Remainer to being championed by Brexiteers, from the Liberal Democrat we saw in the VT to now being a true blue Conservative governing as a Conservative, she might well try and present herself as change. But really, after 12 years of Conservative government, with the prospectus she's offering, can that really answer the call of change that the country is crying out for? I'm not convinced by that. I also think that she went into this contest presenting herself as the loyalist Johnson torchbearer. So I think, again, when it comes to standards in public life, when it comes to the conduct of government, how can she present herself as a candidate for change?
It is interesting, that contradiction, isn't it, that Wes Streeting is right. She has very much played on her loyalty to Boris Johnson. We heard it in her speech as she was announced the new leader of the Conservative Party, and praised Boris Johnson. And yet she is going to be different, or wants to be different. How is she going to pull that off?
I think that's the tightrope, because in this contest, her policy platform has been very true blue. It's what the Conservative Party wants to hear, and that's why she won 57% of the vote there. But it's not the 2019 manifesto. It's not about what Boris Johnson was promising, at least in terms of the economy. His whole agenda was about tackling inequality through the Levelling Up programme. But then you heard on her interview yesterday on the BBC, she's not actually interested in inequality. She's interested in more growth and trying to get the economy bigger. So this is why all these comparisons are made to Margaret Thatcher, because that was really the core of her agenda in the latter years of her premiership. So that's where the difference lies. But of course, the question is, how is that going to play with the country? And obviously, we've got a good while to the next election, 18 months or so. Could be 2 years. But at that point, we'll have to see, can she balance those things off? Because it might make the Conservative Party feel good, but will it make the voters feel good who voted for Johnson in 2019?
I think there's something quite interesting in the way Wes talked about the Labour Party's pitch. And I'm not necessarily saying this as an insult, but it sounded to me as though you were saying that the British people would quite like a party that's a bit boring. I mean, everything you sort of said about we're serious, you know, we don't rush policies, and actually we're going to be less of a risk than the Conservatives at the next election. Given that Truss can be quite erratic at times, I think we've seen that during her campaign with various U-turns, and also just from sort of anecdotes from colleagues who very much support her but think she can be a bit random at times. But perhaps boring is good. Are you going to own boring?
Well, I'd say we're taking a serious approach, and we're very mindful of why we lost the last general election. In fact, why we lost the last 4 general elections.
You definitely weren't boring then.
And no, but look, you can be as exciting as you like, but if you're shocking people in the wrong way and repelling voters, you don't get a chance to deliver anything. And we make no apologies for the facts, and sometimes we do come in for a bit of criticism as an opposition of, you know, well, where's your policy on X or Y, or will you spend A, B or C? Well, unless we've thought the policy through, unless we can show how we would pay for it, and unless we think it answers the challenge of the country, we're not just going to be shooting from the hip announcing policies every week. Where we have, I think, been very effective this summer is taking the single biggest issue facing the country, having a really thought through solution that would help everyone in our country with the cost of living, but also particularly recognise that pensioners and people on lower incomes are particularly suffering, and we're funding it in a fair way with a windfall tax on oil and gas companies. And what I found bemusing about the front pages of today's newspapers, particularly the Daily Telegraph, is that Liz Truss seems to be tying herself up in knots, trying to deliver the same outcome that Labour's proposing, but she doesn't want to go near the windfall tax for no other reason than Labour's proposing it. I think that's very short-sighted, very churlish. It's popular with the voters, and it would really deliver in people's pockets, and it'd be a fair way of funding it. She should just do it.
Briefly.
Wes, just a quick question for you. Obviously, I think a lot of people in Labour might feel quite pleased with the result. There was a poll out this morning, I think, that showed that with Liz Truss as Prime Minister, Labour's lead actually increases over the Conservatives from 10 to 17 points. Do you think there's a danger you're underestimating her at all? Because obviously she's gone through all those different changes you've talked about, and some people might see that as a criticism, but others might see that as a flexibility that she will need to get through this crisis.
There's no complacency on our part, and we know that we're not going to win the next general election simply because the Conservatives are rubbish and have a terrible record. We need people to believe in the alternative. That means having the right leadership, the right team, the right policies and programme, and it needs to be trusted. And that's why we've placed so much emphasis on making sure that when we announce policies, we show how we can pay for them, we show how we can deliver, and we show how we make a meaningful difference to people's lives.
Well, you mentioned leadership. Let's hear from Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, reacting to the result.
Well, we've heard far more from the latest Prime Minister about cuts to corporation tax over the summer than we have about the cost of living crisis, the single most important thing that's bearing down on so many millions of households. And that shows not only that she's out of touch, but that she's not on the side of working people. So she needs to deal with the cost of living crisis, she needs to deal with the fact the NHS is on its knees, and she needs to deal with the collapse of law and order. And there can be no justification for not freezing energy prices. There's a political consensus that that needs to happen. She needs to answer the question, how's she going to pay for that?
That was Keir Starmer. Before I come to you, Gerard, I will in just a moment. Nicola Sturgeon, more reaction from the First Minister this time. Congratulations to Liz Truss. Our political differences are deep, but I will seek to build a good working relationship with her, as I did with the last three Prime Ministers. She must now freeze energy bills for people and businesses, deliver more cash support and increase funding for public services. Just before we get a bit more reaction, you heard Keir Starmer. She's out of touch, Liz Truss. She doesn't understand working people, despite what she has said throughout the campaign. And as a result, she is just continuity Boris Johnson.
Well, she's going to be judged by her actions. I don't think there's anything continuity about it. The one continuity with Boris Johnson is her positive longer-term vision. But the difference with Boris Johnson is she really goes into the detail about what needs to be done now. So I think...
Except for saying whether energy bills should be frozen at this point.
Well, they've got a choice of two things. One is a...
What do you think she should do?
Well, the choice is a continuation of where we've been so far this year. Let the price mechanism take the hit, but then give temporary targeted help to those people in need, helping out those people who can't afford to pay their bills. The challenge with that so far this year has been that small firms have effectively not really received as much help as they probably would have liked. Plan B, which probably is now where one should be focusing, is prices are now so high that people and firms are already adjusting their behaviour. Prices are now so dislocated, war-type situation.
Right.
Therefore, there's a strong argument to go in and cap prices. And then the government takes the risk off consumers, general public and firms. So the positive is that there will be action. The question is whether you go down the price route or the fixing.
All right, well, let's get some reaction from the Secretary of State for Wales. Robert Buckland is there on College Green, initially supporting Rishi Sunak up until relatively recently, and then Liz Truss, who is now going to be Prime Minister. Shameless, says Wes Streeting here in the studio. Robert, your reaction, though, to the result?
Well, I think it's a very important moment. Now we've had the debate within the Conservative Party. It's now time to unite and focus upon the issues that are affecting people up and down the country, most notably the challenge on energy with regard to business and households. And that is what I'm confident the new government will focus on, not just in the weeks ahead, but in the days ahead, in order to address this unprecedented challenge.
Yes, so you're expecting something really in the next few days, rather than waiting for the next few weeks. What made you switch allegiance, Robert Buckland?
Well, it was a long process, and it wasn't an easy one, frankly. And, you know, I've had my critics, but frankly, I did it at a time when I didn't really know what the outcome was going to be. It was about a month ago.
Really?
And they were, yes, it was
I think we've known for about 6 weeks, haven't we?
Well, my decision was made just under a month ago, and I looked at the issues, looked at the reasons. In particular, I had reasons relating to constitutional law and the Bill of Rights, which I'd written about extensively in the national newspapers, and I was particularly concerned that we reflected what I want to see from constitutional rights reform, and also I got a sense that Liz was
going to win.
Look, the result today has been slightly closer than people thought it was going to be. It's still a comprehensive victory, but people are entitled to change their mind and to do so honestly and straightforwardly and publicly. That's what I did, and I make no apology for that whatsoever.
No, I'm sorry to be rude. We were just looking at pictures of Liz Truss there on the steps of Conservative Central Office. She's going in, no doubt, to talk to staff ahead of what's going to unfold over the next 36 hours. Apologies for cutting across you there, Robert Buckland. Do you think that's going to convince anybody? I mean, it's clear, isn't it, that people switch allegiance because they want to back the winner, and you may well have a place in the cabinet still.
Well, look, fundamentally, this issue and this leadership debate should not have been about the personalities. It's about the issues, actually, and the issues that matter to the British people. And this is a very serious time for government.
Yes.
And it's time for people to put aside what they want and who they back and what job they want, and actually think about what matters to the public. And the issue of the day, the big issue, is the cost of energy, the cost of fuel. That is what the new government has to deal with. Well, and that is what we've got to focus on.
So what was it
resolutely?
Right. What was it then in your mind? Because as you say, those are the big issues. That is the biggest issue, the cost of living and people trying to find the money to pay their bills. Because at one point, Rishi Sunak's campaign, of which you supported, said that her plans were immoral. So when did they become moral?
That was a problem for me. I think that Conservatives shouldn't accuse each other of being immoral. We're not immoral. We're trying to sincerely, with goodwill, reach the right conclusions to reflect the concerns of the British people. I knew that by the end of August we'd be facing the new average price cap. I knew that any Prime Minister, whether it was Rishi or Liz coming into office, would be faced with a very serious challenge. And pragmatism and a sense of realism is now the order of the day. And that's, I think, this is what we're going to see from Liz in the early days of her premiership.
Right, how's she going to do that? I mean, do you think there will be others, fellow Conservative MPs who have supported Rishi Sunak throughout, who will follow what you are saying now? Or is there going to be, I suppose, an understandable level of bitterness?
My strong advice about people who might be on the losing side is don't get bitter about it. Just deal with the situation. You know, I faced a situation last year where I left government unexpectedly. It's no good being bitter. You've got to sort of pick yourself up and work together for the good of the country. That's what Conservatives have been historically very good at. That's what I expect every Conservative MP and colleague to do now, bearing in mind what is in the minds of businesses, in the minds of households as we speak today. We owe it to the British people to rise to the level of events. I'm confident that Liz and her new team can do that.
Robert Buckland, thank you very much, Secretary of State for Wales there on College Green. I know what you think.
I'm sorry for heckling.
But no, we know what you think. That was clear. That was clear throughout. But Isabel, your reaction?
Well, I mean, I think his point about the Conservatives being very dedicated to winning is an important one. They're not like the Labour Party in that they're never comfortable losing. Sorry, Wes. And there will be a will to try to achieve the sort of gravity-defying trick of winning the next election, which is going to be very difficult for them. But I just think there are so many sort of holes that Liz Truss can trip over in the next few months. We've talked a lot about the cost of living, but just to come back to an obsession of mine, and obviously Wes's obsession as well, the NHS, that is, I've just finished writing a book on its nearly 75-year history. I don't think the health service has been in this great and existential crisis in its entire history, and I'm also not sure that the Conservatives have ever been more clueless about how to fix it.
Gerard, more clueless?
Well, I was going to put in another additional issue, but in terms of health, Conservative approach would probably be that in terms of the NHS, they've actually provided lots of money to it, and it's about public sector reform. But the issue raised earlier on was about indexation of public services generally. Higher inflation has given the Treasury a windfall boost on revenues, but it will actually pose questions about departmental budgets, about benefits.
They're going to be cut, aren't they?
Well, benefits were not. Well, lots of these things probably don't have time to be addressed in September. The budget will either have to be fully before the end of the year, if it's called the spring statement in 3 weeks, or there will have to be an early budget in March next year. They will be addressed then. What I was going to say is the bigger issue, things that are outside of Downing Street's control sometimes, and that's namely in terms of the financial markets. The last few weeks, we've seen a strong dollar across the board. The pound has weakened. Last few weeks across Western Europe, bond yields have risen, partly because inflation is higher, interest rates are going up. So we have a difficult
environment. It's going to cost more to service the debt.
Well, servicing the debt is not really the issue, in the sense that it's fully costed, in the sense that 25% of our borrowing is on index-linked gilts. It doesn't come out of day-to-day spending. We can still borrow around 3%, which is very negative real interest rates, less than the rate of inflation. The point, though, that I was going to say is that in terms of the financial markets, one needs to have policies that are seen as credible and effective so that the pound probably will continue to weaken because the dollar is so strong. But we don't want to see a situation where the turbulence in the markets becomes peculiar to the UK as opposed to at the moment where it's more broad-based.
Do you agree with substantial amounts of borrowing going up at this particular point to A, help people, and B, support departments like the NHS?
Well, we've been very careful to avoid just reaching for borrowing as the answer. In fact, Rachel Reeves set out fiscal rules which made a distinction between capital investment, investment in things like railways, bricks and mortar, things that ultimately pay for themselves in the long term and help to drive economic growth, and day-to-day spending. And we've said in our fiscal rules we won't borrow for day-to-day spending. That's why when we set out our plans for the windfall tax to help people with their bills, we didn't just say whack it on more borrowing. When we're thinking about our investment in public services, we're hesitating before setting out clear spending commitments, because we know that by the next election, so much will depend on the climate and the economy, how much fiscal headroom there is, and we're being cautious, we're being careful, and we're being, I hope, reassuring to the voters, because I do think, and I think the irony for me in discussions like this, and this is something I think the left finds hard to hear sometimes, we are judged by the same people, the electorate, on completely different terms to the Conservatives. So we could announce identical policies and we could both say they were funded by borrowing. If a Conservative says, I will fund it by borrowing, people go, it's all right, it's the Tories. If Labour reaches for that answer, people don't buy it. And so I think we are thinking very carefully about making sure that we are, we're addressing voters' concerns.
So you won't go into the next election saying that taxes need to rise?
Well, look, we're not going to create hostages to fortune. I think Rachel Reeves has been very clear about attacking the high tax economy that we have, which is driven by low growth, and our focus on getting growth back into the economy. Because, and I'll just make this point, if the economy under this government had grown at the same rate as under the last Labour government, there would be £30 billion more to spend on public services without raising a single additional penny in taxes.
I know
that's the difference between the Labour government and the Conservative
These two are desperate to come in. Just briefly, the response to that. Is it true that they're judged by different metrics here?
I think that there's probably certainly some truth to that, because when you look at people, there's more of a natural inclination to trust politicians on the right with the economy. But this comes to the heart of Liz Truss's biggest challenge, because Gerard said earlier she won't be made or broken by this winter. I think she will be, actually. I think if this cost of living package doesn't meet what the country needs, doesn't calm the markets, doesn't create a public debt crisis, then if any of those go wrong, that's it for her premiership. And she will essentially spend until the next election on the back foot, and Labour can make the argument the Conservatives have broken it, give us a chance. But if she gets it right, and she does do a set not too far off what Labour's doing with some tax cuts thrown in, then I actually think that she will start on a better foot in 23, and she's then got an opportunity to do as she said and try and deliver some extra stuff.
Just to come back to what Wes said, when you talked about, we've hesitated before announcing policies. You have had, I think it's fair to say, 2 big policy wins in terms of the windfall tax and the energy bill freeze. So is it not time to stop hesitating and to get some more policies out there so that you can make more people in more departments more uncomfortable?
Well, we've got the conference coming up, so watch
it's
this
going to be
space.
We'll watch this space, because I realise we've only got 6 minutes or so left on the programme. Doesn't time fly when you're having fun, to quote. Damien Green, he is on College Green, rather conveniently for us. He was First Secretary of State under Theresa May, backed Rishi Sunak in the leadership contest. Your man lost. Your response?
Well, I mean, obviously I would have preferred Rishi to win, but it's now the job of all of us in the Conservative Party to rally behind Liz as the new Prime Minister. And in particular, I mean, picking up on your previous discussion, I'm looking forward to hearing the energy support package that she says she is going to produce very urgently, and I think that's exactly the right thing to do. I think the country needs it, and so that will be the first big announcement, and I agree that it's very, very important to hit the ground running.
Right. Obviously, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss clashed throughout in terms of the response economically to the crisis. Do you think Liz Truss's plans to cut tax are immoral?
No, I don't. I think that, I mean, again, we don't know what the plans are yet. I think that some of the support will obviously have to come directly into people's pockets, and we can all discuss over the coming days whether what the exact mix should be. But I think part of that needs to be a significant part of the response. But having some tax cuts as another part of the response is perfectly sensible.
Right. Do you think they're fair? The policies that she has suggested in terms of cutting taxes for all, which would benefit those higher up the income scale, or not?
Well, they can be, and I suspect they will be, because they'll be part of a wider package. And what I will, and more importantly, actually, the people of this country who are worried about their bills will judge them on, is the overall package, the balance between the direct support, perhaps particularly targeted on those who need it most, and tax cuts that may well be welcomed by the whole population.
Right. I mean, I'm using some of these words because these were obviously some of the things that Rishi Sunak said throughout the campaign. I mean, can you now so easily stand there within an hour or so of Liz Truss being announced as the next Conservative leader and Prime Minister of the country, just forget about the fact that you agreed with the sentiment that borrowing your way out of this was going to cause destitution for future generations?
Well, I think that we've had an election campaign. In all election campaigns, tough things are said.
Sure.
But
did you mean them, or did you not at the time?
I mean, I haven't said any of that. I supported Tom Tugendhat and then Penny Mordaunt and then Rishi.
But is her economic plan a fairy tale?
No, I think that and I'm conscious you're using all of Rishi's words.
Well,
but what I care about is what will happen now she's Prime Minister, and what she said this morning is that she's going to concentrate on delivery. She said that within a few days we will have the outlines of the support package. And I think it's sensible for everyone to judge her and judge the new government on what's in that support package. That's actually what matters to people in their real lives.
Right, Damien, I mean, she won, obviously, the majority of party members, but not the parliamentary party. The last person to be elected leader of the Conservative Party in that situation was Ian Duncan Smith. Does it bode well?
Well, I think it's a completely different situation because Ian was leader of the opposition and Liz is Prime Minister. So therefore, she has the government machine at her disposal. She is facing a hell of an in-tray. I think everyone across the political spectrum agrees that as Prime Minister, she is facing a very difficult set of circumstances. And what she said today is the perfectly sensible point that she will crack on straight away at dealing with them. And that's what will decide the success of her Prime Ministership.
Damien Green, thank you very much for joining us today. Let's talk about Boris Johnson. He hasn't left number 10 yet. Gerard Lyons, are you disappointed by the fact that maybe he won't be involved in frontline politics again, or are you hoping he'll take a big back seat?
I have a neutral view on both of those. In terms of his record the last few years, as was mentioned quite often this morning on the radio and probably across the road at QE2 Centre, positive on Brexit, positive on the vaccine, positive on Ukraine. They're all positives. So, but we all know the reasons why he's left. I would tend to prefer to actually move on and come back to some of the points we were talking about, Liz Truss, actually, and say it's positive that at least the vision of Boris Johnson is there, but is now probably more achievable because we've got clear economic plans to go with it.
Is he going to take a back seat?
No. He's always going to be in the front line in one way or another, whether it's on the green bench of the House of Commons or on speaking tours or quiz shows or whatever. He's just not somebody who is going to retire to the library and write think tank pamphlets. It's not going to happen, and that's not how he's going to earn money. So yeah, but don't forget, she's not just got him on the backbenches. She's also got Rishi Sunak currently, and also Theresa May.
Right.
So she's got quite a lot of people sort of lined up who, Theresa May used to criticise Boris Johnson quite sort of politely and acidically. She'd get up and ask a short and quite damning question and sit down again in the House of Commons. I suspect Boris Johnson might get a little bit more attention for his.
Definitely, and I think Boris Johnson's been going around telling his friends he wants to put some hay in the attic, aka sort out his personal financial situation. And as we report in the FT today, he may well be heading out to the US earning $250,000 per speech from various Midwestern universities you've never heard of. He will also write his memoirs. He may return to newspapers, but I think certainly we've not heard the last of him for a long time.
And we haven't mentioned the Privileges Committee. We'll have to deal with that tomorrow. But that's all for today. Thank you very much to all of you, my guests today. I'll be back tomorrow at 12:15 on BBC Two and on the iPlayer. Bye.